What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. Both first and third person narrators can and do tell us the thoughts and feelings of other characters. When a third-person narrator does this, we call it omniscience. When a first-person narrator reports the thoughts and feelings of characters other than herself, we call it inference or speculation. So first-person narrators can speculate or infer what other characters are thinking and feeling. They can project, they can misconstrue, they can misinterpret. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach, and each week we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Norman Mailer once said, "The most powerful leverage in fiction comes from point of view." I agree. One of the most important decisions you're going to make about your story is its point of view. It's also one of the more complex story structures to master. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a different understanding of point of view that you probably haven't heard before. This way you can control it more and take advantage of the range available to you with this very rich narrative resource. Most of us are writing in first person or third person. So first person is when a character in the story is narrating the events. Third person is when a narrator outside the events of the story is reporting the action. And because this narrator is outside the events of the story, he's able to be outside and inside certain characters. It may be one character, it may be multiple characters. But there is so much more to point of view beyond which person you write in. So you can think of point of view as the center of perception in your story, the center of perception. The person you write in, first or third, that is the angle of perception. Who's telling the story? But this doesn't give you the various degrees of depth and range available within that angle, and that's what point of view is all about. Yes, person is an aspect of point of view, but the primary purpose of point of view is to manipulate the degree of distance between the characters and your reader. Now, sometimes the narrator will be on the outside observing. Sometimes the narrator will be in the characters' thoughts, sometimes inside their hearts, and this distance will modulate throughout the narrative. For example, Hemingway keeps us at an objective distance. It's very similar to sitting in a theater watching a dramatic stage play unfold. He rarely goes into a character's thoughts. When he does, it's very fleeting and very subtle. For the most part, he gives us the action straight up. He mostly gives us only what can be externally observed. It's a masterclass really in show don't tell, because we're able to infer what the characters are thinking and feeling based on what they say, based on subtle body movements, gestures, etc. His story, Hills Like White Elephants, is a great example. However, he does occasionally close the distance and brings us into the character's thoughts, and he does it strategically. Just like a play, Hills Like White Elephants is mostly dialogue, and at first the dialogue is pretty trivial. It's small talk between a man and a woman, but it becomes clear that there's some tension between them. And 2 pages into the story, the man indirectly brings up the subject that's causing their tension. The woman is pregnant and she wants to have the baby, but he doesn't. Now, they never mention that she's pregnant. They never mention abortion, but it's clear that he's pressuring her to have an abortion. It's all in the subtext. Now, eventually she loses patience with him and she asks him to please, 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 please stop talking. Now, at this point, Hemingway moves us slightly into the man's thoughts. The man looked up the tracks but could not see the train. So this is something that can't be externally observed, what the man was unable to see. And so he moves a little way into his mind and reduces the distance between us and him slightly. And then 2 sentences later, he takes us further inside him and reduces the distance even more. He writes that the man drank an anise at the bar and looked at the people. They were all waiting reasonably for the train. Reasonably. This is no longer objective. It tells us not only what the man sees or fails to see, but his opinion about what he sees. Now, he could have just written, he looked up the tracks without telling us whether he could see the train or not. He could have written that the people were all waiting for the train, but it's the word reasonably that narrows the distance. So by bringing us into his thoughts, we understand that he thinks the woman is being unreasonable and everyone, including him, are being reasonable. But Hemingway is controlling the distance between the characters and the reader. So there are techniques that you can control through your narrator, be it first person or third person. And it's far more important to focus on the techniques a certain narrator uses, not the person he uses. Now, all narrative techniques are found in both first person and third person narration alike. The common myth about first person is that this narrator is limited. He or she can't get into the minds of other characters the way an omniscient narrator can. First person narration is limited to those things that the narrating character sees, hears, feels, knows himself, or that have been reported to him by other characters. But I'm going to challenge this. Both first and third person narrators use the technique of omniscience, which is reporting on the thoughts and feelings of one character or 2 or more characters. So let's get clear on what omniscience is. We're not talking about the all-knowing godlike narrator who can roam into any or all characters' minds. First off, this kind of narrator can dilute your story's point of view. Because when too many characters' thoughts and feelings matter, no one's thoughts and feelings matter. Omniscience is the technique of reporting accurately or not a character's thoughts and feelings. For example, not just what they see, but what they think about what they see. They were all waiting reasonably for the train. Both first and third person narrators can and do tell us the thoughts and feelings of other characters. When a third-person narrator does this, we call it omniscience. When a first-person narrator reports the thoughts and feelings of characters other than herself, we call it inference or speculation. So first-person narrators can speculate or infer what other characters are thinking and feeling. They can project, they can misconstrue, they can misinterpret. Now, I'm not talking about a first-person narrator noticing that the person they're speaking to or observing is grimacing or growling. I mean that they're actually interpreting how the character thinks or feels and reporting it with the same omniscient authority as a third-person narrator would. Here's an example from Suzanne Burney's novel, A Crime in the Neighborhood. Now, I literally just took this book off my shelf and opened it to a random page. So to set the scene, the narrator is 10-year-old Marcia, and a new neighbor, Mr. Green, has recently moved next door. Now, Marcia finds him odd and is suspicious of him and becomes convinced he's the man who killed the young boy at the beginning of the novel. At the start of this scene, Mr. Green is sitting on his lawn in his aluminum folding chair, reading his newspaper, as he usually does. And her mother starts chatting with him through her screen door. "Isn't it hot?" my mother cried. She couldn't believe how hot it was. She thought if it got any hotter, she'd be hard-boiled. Rolling his newspaper into a tight cylinder, Mr. Green nodded once as he strode toward the hedge, then twice again for emphasis. She opened the screen door. "Maybe we'll get a tornado," she said as she walked down the steps. "A quick little tornado would be so nice." Mr. Green's face, which all this time had been lifting into an alert expression, plunged back into its customary blankness. Clearly, he couldn't follow why my mother would want a tornado, especially after we just had such an early hurricane. He wasn't the first person to be confused by my mother's domestication of disaster. Okay, and then she goes into this brief piece of backstory, recalling being terrified as a child at her mother's reaction to certain things, like the sound of the vacuum cleaner or a car cutting in front of their car on the beltway, her reaction to lost library books. So she lists these things that her mother has translated as danger. Now, this is key because the story is about this young narrator, 10-year-old Marcia, not feeling safe. So the novel starts with the discovery of a murdered boy, her age, and so this brief backstory about danger is not arbitrary. So it's not just some random memories. It ties back to the novel's theme of this young girl not feeling safe in the world. So point of view is not just what your character remembers or notices, but how they slant it. So she relives some key memories, and then she says, the only way to tolerate life's dangers, she had long ago decided, was to make them routine. She never seemed to understand that other people found this attitude unnerving. Okay, so she's speculating on how her mother thinks and feels, and then we return to the present. Wouldn't it be lovely to get rid of all this hot air? She asked wistfully. Just a short tornado to blow it all out to sea. Mr. Green's smile returned, twitching the muscles in his face. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. He laughed the way cartoon characters laugh, enunciating the words, ha, ha. Ha, ha, echoed my mother, fanning herself with a hand. I'm sure she would have been astonished if someone had told her right then that she was flirting. But what else could she have been doing? And who besides me could have blamed her? Okay, so here's a first-person narrator mimicking omniscience. She's reporting what's in her mother's mind. Is it accurate? Maybe. The details she notices seem to corroborate this, but that's not the point. It's her point of view. It's what she notices and how she interprets it. Clearly, he couldn't follow why my mother would want a tornado. He wasn't the first person to be confused. She had long ago decided. She never seemed to understand. I'm sure she would have been astonished if someone had told her right then that she was flirting. So she's assuming knowledge of what's in both characters' minds here, Mr. Green's and her mother's. And by the way, we do this all the time, whether we're conscious of it or not. We infer what other people are thinking and feeling, or we just speculate, and we usually believe it is true, even though we don't really have evidence. So omniscience is not the sole province of third-person narrators. The technique is the same. In each case, the narrator is assuming the right to inform the reader of the contents of a character's heart and mind. The only distinction, really, is the reader's response. With a third-person narrator, we're more likely to accept it as true, whereas with a first-person narrator, we may doubt their statements as being true. Now, for more on first person, listen to episode 120, Writing in First Person, 5 Challenges and How to Conquer Them. Episode 120, I will link in the show notes. Okay, the next question is, how do you bring us into a character's heart and mind from third person? Because often what happens with third person is the writer feels more distant and removed. They're at a distance, and it can be more challenging to move into a character's interior. It feels more natural to do this in first person, and so they tend to stay on the surface. They may tell us what a character feels, but they don't really inhabit it. It stays at this equanimity of distance. Again, point of view is a way of controlling the distance between your characters and your reader. You're modulating that distance. So a way to bring the reader into a character's heart and mind in third person is to put yourself there. Move out of the objective and external into the internal subjective. Here's an example. James Jones, who wrote the novel The Pistol, wanted to show his main character's motivation for struggling to keep his pistol while others were trying to buy or steal it. When the first bombs lit at Wheeler Field on December 7th, 1941, PFC Richard Mast was eating breakfast. He was also wearing a pistol. So here in the opening paragraph, the author sets up the central issue of the novel. Richard Mast does manage to keep the pistol assigned to him for guard duty, but it's also about the struggle around the pistol, which provides the pathos, the savagery, and even the humor of the story. In the chaos of those first days and weeks of war, every effort is made to get this pistol away from Mast by offers of money, by threats, and by theft, and even by violence. But he's obsessed by his need for the weapon. It becomes for him and for the men around him a symbol of personal salvation for which any one of them will make any sacrifice. So I'm going to read you the first version where the point of view remains more on the outside of the character, and then I'll read you the revised version, which moves more into Richard Mast's interior. Here's the first version. All he knew was that everyone wanted it badly, and that he was having a hard time keeping it. The sense of personal safety that it gave him, the awareness that here at last was one object which he could actually depend on, the almost positive knowledge that it would one day actually save him, All of these comforted him as he lay rolled up in his 2 blankets and one shelter half, with the rocky ground jabbing him in the flanks, or as he toiled back-breakingly all day long at the never-ending job of putting up barbed wire. The world was going to hell in a handbasket, but if he could only hold on to the pistol, remain in possession of that extra margin of safety its beautiful blue steel pregnant weight offered him, he could be saved, could come through it. Obviously, a lot of other people seem to feel that way. Okay, so in this first version, he's more detached. The point of view doesn't really bring us deeply into how this character feels. I mean, it's not bad and it's a good start, but it's more intellectual. We don't really feel it. Here's the second version. All Mast knew was the feeling that the pistol gave him, and that was that it comforted him. As he lay rolled up in his 2 blankets and one shelter half at night, with the rock ground jabbing him in the ribs or flanks, and the wind buffeting his head and ears, or he worked with his arms numb to the shoulder all day long at the never-ending job of putting up recalcitrant barbed wire, it comforted him. Thy rod and thy staff. Perhaps he had no staff, unless you could call his rifle that, but he had a rod, and it would be his salvation. One day, it would save him. The sense of personal defensive safety that it gave him was tremendous. The world was rocketing to hell in a bucket, but if he could only hold on to his pistol, remain in possession of the promise of salvation its beautiful blue steel bullet-charged weight offered him, he could be saved. Okay, so both versions say essentially the same thing, but what's different is in the way the author expresses those things. So one way to make use of third person and get into the deeper folds of your character's interiority is to narrow the distance, saying in effect, here is why my character feels and acts the way he does. So in the first version, the language is kind of stiff and formal. The point of view calls attention to the fact that the narrator is informing the reader of Mast's motives, but in the second version, we see Mast himself sorting out his own motives, and with much more specific images, such as beautiful blue steel bullet-charged weight to help eliminate the abstract language from the first version. So he narrows the third person distance and in effect says, here's why my character feels and acts the way he does. This is why the pistol is so important for him to hold on to. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Number 1, point of view is the center of perception. Number 2, you should pay attention not only to the person you're using, but all the techniques that manipulate your narrator's distance from the characters. So the primary purpose of point of view is manipulating distance. Number 3, both first and third person use the same techniques. For example, omniscience is not the sole province of third person narrators. First person can also use the technique of omniscience. And number 4, third person can be outside a character and inside a character. To take advantage of that range to move deeper into the thoughts and feelings of a character, inhabit them yourself. Don't be afraid to break the omniscient voice and narrow the distance between character and reader. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing and I'll talk to you soon.